Have you ever felt resentful when someone else benefits or gains something? Upon closer examination, it may seem irrational to feel this way, as another person's gain doesn't necessarily mean a loss for you. This psychological phenomenon is known as the zero-sum bias. In this video, we'll introduce the concept of zero-sum bias and how it works. By the end, you may understand one reason why people sometimes feel irrationally frustrated. 1. The psychology behind zero-sum bias. Zero-sum bias refers to the tendency to think that if one party gains, another must lose, due to the perception that the total amount of resources is limited. This bias is related to the balance between human competitiveness, cooperation, and altruistic behavior. Research on zero-sum bias began in the late 20th century and has attracted attention in fields such as economics, psychology, and sociology. 2. Details, results, and conclusions of the experiment that discovered zero-sum bias. A specific experiment on zero-sum bias was conducted by psychologists David Messick and Keith Sentis in the early 1980s. They presented subjects with resource allocation problems to investigate the presence of zero-sum bias. 2.1. Experiment details. Participants were asked to make choices in hypothetical scenarios, where they had to allocate limited resources in several different ways. Scenarios were divided into situations with high and low resource availability, and participants made choices in both. 2.2. Experiment results. The results showed that when participants felt resources were limited, they tended to believe that their own losses resulted from others' gains. In contrast, this bias diminished in situations where they felt resources were abundant. 2.3. Conclusion. The experiment suggested that zero-sum bias is deeply rooted in human thinking. In particular, when people feel resources are limited, they tend to think that others' gains lead to their own losses, which can disrupt the balance between competition and cooperation. This finding highlights the importance of emphasizing cooperation and mutual benefit in business, international relations, and everyday life. 3. Why zero-sum bias was necessary for humans. The reason zero-sum bias was necessary for humans is believed to be that it served as an adaptive function to protect oneself or one's group's interests in the intense survival, competition, and limited resources during the evolutionary process. In the distant past, when humans lived in hunter-gatherer societies, resources such as food, water, and shelter were always limited, and competition with other individuals or groups was inevitable. Therefore, thinking that others' gains would lead to losses for oneself or one's group was helpful for self-defense and maximizing benefits. Moreover, it is said that zero-sum bias was helpful in striking a balance between cooperation and competition with others. When a competitor acquired resources, perceiving it as a personal loss would maintain the motivation to continue competing for resources. However, in modern society, situations requiring cooperation and mutual benefit have increased, and resources have become more abundant than before. Consequently, the once adaptive zero-sum bias now frequently operates inappropriately in contemporary settings. Today, overcoming zero-sum bias and prioritizing cooperation and mutual benefit is crucial for building better relationships and a more positive social environment. 4. Situations where zero-sum bias is likely to occur. Zero-sum bias is particularly likely to occur in the following situations. 4.1. Situations where resources are perceived as limited. When resources, rewards, or opportunities are perceived as limited, the idea that one person's gain leads to one's own loss becomes more likely to arise. For example, in work environments with limited budgets, personnel, or promotional positions, zero-sum bias may be more prominent. 4.2. Highly competitive situations. In highly competitive situations, it is important to win against others, and the tendency to believe that someone else's gain is one's own loss becomes stronger. Zero-sum bias is more likely to occur in situations with intense competition, such as sports games, entrance exams, or job hunting. 4.3. Situations where comparisons with others are emphasized. In situations where comparisons with others are emphasized, the clear distinction between winners and losers can lead to the emergence of zero-sum bias. In situations where comparisons with others are at the forefront, such as on social media or rankings, it is easy to fall into zero-sum bias. 4.4. Situations with heightened anxiety or stress. In situations with increased anxiety or stress, competition with others becomes more conscious for self-defense. making zero-sum bias more likely to occur. Zero-sum bias may become more prominent in unstable situations, such as during economic downturns or social changes. 5. Ways to debate zero-sum bias. When you feel irritated, seeing others benefit, try the following coping strategies. 5.1. Change the comparison target between yourself and others. Since irritation often arises from comparing oneself to others, try changing the comparison target between yourself and others. Instead of comparing others' successes to your own past, compare your present self to your future self, focusing on self-growth and goal achievement. 5.2. Cultivate a growth mindset. The growth mindset proposed by Dr. Carol Dweck is the belief that one's abilities and talents are not fixed and can grow through effort and experience. Instead of feeling irritated by others' successes, see their success as an opportunity for your own growth and find points to learn from. 5.3. Practice empathetic joy. Empathetic joy madita is the act of genuinely rejoicing in the happiness and success of others. As part of Buddhist teachings, perceiving others' success as your own success can alleviate feelings of irritation and envy. Practicing rejoicing in others' successes can also improve your own sense of happiness. 5.4. Practice mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness meditation is a meditation technique aimed at directing non-judgmental attention to one's emotions and thoughts. When feeling irritated by others' successes, practicing mindfulness meditation can help accept these emotions, face one's inner self, and enable emotional control. In conclusion, the reason for feeling irritated when seeing others benefit may be due to the workings of zero-sum bias. Zero-sum bias is the belief that when resources are perceived as limited, others' gains result in one's own losses. This bias arose in the course of human evolution, but can still operate in inappropriate situations in modern society. Knowing the reason for the bias doesn't necessarily prevent irritation. As long as you don't engage in aggressive behavior towards others, there is no harm in feeling irritated. In such cases, it might be appropriate to simply not say anything and let it go, thinking, "That's just the way it is."